Slowly, okay? And then fast and loudly. Start with a word of thanks to the organizers. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to come to the University of Bejaia and meet all colleagues, old and new. There is a small, or we can say a big change in my presentation. First of all, now it's a joint presentation since we have enough time. You know, at the beginning, we've been allowed only 15 minutes. So now that there is much more time, Professor Amezen will join me in the second part of this presentation. And second is on the title. Okay, it was a quick title. Now I reformulated the title, and maybe you will help me find a more suitable title, because I don't like the one I've sent. Okay? The core of the title is there, and at the end we'll try to find a better title together. It's not thank you, of course. Thank you will be at the end. My presentation is about civic education and literature. I have asked a question, civic education and the teaching of the literature, what connection? Well, the connection is still there, the question is still there, but I will reformulate the title with your help at the end, please. The subject of this conference has pushed me to go over my previous knowledge on literature and to put it in perspective with the subject of the conference. So the first thing I ask myself, I am a teacher of literature, and the conference is about civic education. Is there a link? Is there a connection? I started to find definition for each concept. And the first one was, of course, civic. Civic is a word that we use every day. However, this is not a title, okay? Sorry. This is a subject, a word we use every day, but we never question ourselves, what does it mean? I said to myself, and I ask you the question, civic education. Education is the noun, civic is an adjective. What is the noun of civic? Yeah. Yes? Civics? No. No. Well, we say the origin of the word is civis. It's a Latin word, which means citizen. And civic or civil is the adjective of civic. Oh, sorry, civis in Latin. It's linked to the citizen. This is the origin of the word. But this word, through time, has acquired connotative meaning, other meanings. With time, you know, words become concepts sometimes. They are burdened with meaning. What is the connotative meaning of civic now? Words have a history. And civic now is understood as being the one who likes his country. It means patriotic, in a way. It's patriotic. A civil behavior, it is patriotic behavior. A civil right, and this is the second, a civic right, it is a right linked to you as citizen right. And then there is two other important connotations of the verb, which are, one, civic or civil as opposed to religious. Because in the Middle Ages, in Europe, it were religious ages, time of religion. And then, in the French Revolution, they proclaimed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Citizen. La Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme et du citoyen. And it is since then that this word has acquired the second connotation, as I said, which is contrary to religious. It becomes a kind of a dichotomy, religious or civic. As there is a second dichotomy, which is civic or civil, as opposed to military. We speak civil war, it means between citizens, not between armies. Remember these connotations, please, especially this dichotomy, which, as I explained, was born from the beginning, from the French Revolution, and then when the secular school in French called l'éducation laïque, the secular education, it took its shape, education civique, meaning opposed to education militaire ou religieuse. Okay? This is very important to know the history of the world. So that was the first step of my research, to define civil or civic. And as I said, it brought me to a dichotomy. Remember this dichotomy, and please remind me at the end about this dichotomy. Now, education. What is education? Educate, in the dictionary, you will find it is to educate, to form, to train, to teach, to initiate. All these are synonyms of to educate. And in each case of these words, these verbs, we find they imply what? A master and a learner. In each case, education can be linked to parents. Education can be to the school, etc. But in each case, there is a link. It is implied a master and a learner. And you have heard Dr. Azza, sorry if I mentioned her name, okay? She told us, as many educationists believe, that when the child is very young, it's easy to influence him. This idea of influencing him has names. There are verbs to express this. It is to domesticate him, to tame him. These words now, they remind me what Derrida said about education. Derrida tells us that teaching, especially teaching life, when one of his books, Derrida starts by asking this question: what is to learn to live? He starts with this question: what is to learn to live? And then he explains and reaches the conclusion that to teaching to someone how to live, this is what we do. I quote, teaching would always say something about violence. There is always violence in teaching. I don't mean physical violence. It can, in our traditional schools, you know. There is much violence in it. But even symbolic violence. And there is always a form of violence in teaching people to live. Because to teach is to tame, is to domesticate, is to give a shape which apparently was not there at the beginning. Okay. Remember now this second concept, teaching, a form of violence. I move now to the third concept, and now I will dwell on it. And from the definition of literature, you will understand the link that I'm speaking about. The link, we will infer it together at the end, okay? Please be patient. Now, to define literature, this is the most difficult task I've ever encountered in teaching literature, is to define it. Okay? How to define literature. So it was, when it is so complex, I took the easiest way, or the shortest way, the simplest way. I went to the first intellectual, let's say, to have defined literature. And what is the oldest book of literature that we know? It means theory of literature. Aristotle. I went to the Poetics. I think it's time over. Sorry. I told you as a beginner I speak slowly, but later it's something else. Okay, I went to Aristotle's Poetics. And we all know that Aristotle defines, he spoke about his time, his age, and he tried to define literature. He said, literature is a mode of mimesis. This word is very important. Mimesis, I quote it in Greek. It is in Greek mimesis, or mimesis. I don't know the English pronunciation, but it is not an English word anyway. So mimesis has been translated into imitation or representation. It means literature is a mode of imitation or of representation. But imitation of what? That's the question. To imitate or to represent what? Aristotle still tells us literature is a mode of imitation or representation of actions. It's action. Of course, it's not any action. It's actions with agents who are, it's very important to understand who are the agents of the action. He says it's the agents who are either good man or bad man. Or it can be very good or very bad. This is action, imitation of action of people who are very good or very bad, or in the mixture of both. Okay? It means when he tells us that literature is imitation of action by men who are good or bad, these men encompass together, okay, the diversity of human character. We all identify with this society. There are always good men, bad men in the middle, with little bad and little good, etc. Conclusion: characters in literature are lifelike. They are taken from life. They are not taken from Mars. They are taken from life. And you know all Shakespeare, who wonderfully put it in one of his famous verses, taken from As You Like It, he writes, all the world's a stage, and all men and women merely players. They have their exits, it means the death. They have their exits and their entrances, birth. And one man in his time play many parts, his acts being 7 ages. I suggest that you go to the internet and you search for this verse, and it is called the 7 ages of man. Just write on Google the 7 ages of man. And let's repeat the first 2 lines. All men and women, all the world's stage. It has often been translated as being le monde est un théâtre, and où chacun joue son jeu. I do not agree with the second part of the translation, but anyway, let's deal with the English one. All the world's stage, and all men and women merely players. Here, when mostly people, common people, ordinary people, refer to this verse and they attribute it to a French author, I think to Victor Hugo or to someone else, but it belongs to Shakespeare, they mean that people are hypocrites because they play acts, they play roles in life, but actually this is not who they are truly. This is how it is understood. But this poem should not be understood like this. Or at least this is only one interpretation. When Shakespeare tells us that all the world's a stage, he means that the stage is the word. It means on the stage, and here I am on stage, I can put the word. I can represent the word. I can imitate the word. This is what he means. In other words, he is telling us, in my stage, I offer you life. And remember, education, to live. We are educated to live. And here, Shakespeare is telling us that literature, or the stage, like literature, like the novel, is lifelike because it represents life. Do you follow me so far, please? Because until now, I have not answered the question. Sorry. Okay, I'm still with defining. Now, when I return to Shakespeare's characters, sorry, not Shakespeare, Aristotle's definition to characters. He speaks about, he distinguishes 2 types of characters in drama. Aristotle distinguishes 2 types. It's very important. I will return later. We will see. Everything will explain itself later. Aristotle defines 2 types. He said, okay, remember, we are in the Greek period. Okay, the Greek was a class society. So they distinguished between 2 types of audience. The first one was the noble, the aristocrats. The second one is the ordinary and common men, and sometimes even the slaves, because there were slaves in Athens, you know. Okay, and Aristotle tells us that for the Greeks, for the nobles and aristocrats, we perform for them tragedies. And for common man, we perform for them comedies. These are the two dramatic forms in Greek drama. You will not find another one. Okay, only these two. And then he tells us, in tragedy, the characters are above our level of goodness. It means they are very, very good, beyond human, in a way, goodness, which is not the case of the comedy, which is beneath our level of goodness, or just as we are. As we are, it means ordinary people. Why this distinction? What does it mean, this distinction? Actually, he speaks about above our level of goodness. He speaks about myth. The Greek tragedy is mostly about myth. Example, Oedipus. Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus the king, is about a myth, Oedipus. Okay? And other Aristophanes who used to deal with comedies, they deal with other people. Now, why does Aristotle make this distinction between mythical characters and ordinary characters, comic characters? As I said, he lived in a class society, therefore he distinguished between the nobles, the aristocrats, and comedies, which are for ordinary people, commoners, let's say. Now, why now tragedy was designed for the nobles, the aristocrats? Why? Ask another question. What did the Greek aristocrat, and you know, this happened also in England during the Renaissance, and in France during the Enlightenment, tragedies was only for the nobles. Okay, according to Aristotle, the action of tragedy, which describes the fall, catastrophic fall of a man, of status, of a myth, arouses pity and fear and purges them. You know the verb purge, to purge? When you see a tragedy, in the classical definition of the term, it arouses in the audience, especially nobles, a feeling of cold catharsis. Catharsis, or the cathartic effect, is to arouse pity and fear and then be relieved out of them. As I said, this process is called catharsis. Catharsis implies a very important thing. What is it? Identification. This is a key concept through which literature works. When you identify with a character, you undergo the same experience as this character. This is what pushes our mothers and even our sisters and even sometimes ourselves. When we watch a movie or read a novel, we cry with the character because there is idea of identification. In other words, now, if we apply identification on catharsis and tragedy and the nobles, aristocracy, we say attending tragedies in the Greek time and identifying with the heroes made the Greek nobility better persons, better citizens, because they identified with the plight of that tragic hero. But what about comedies now? Comedies for everyone, and there is no identification in comedy. Comedy, like tragedies, does not work with identification because the comic character is always, ridiculed, mocked. What is there? It's not identification. It's rather, yes? When you like a character, you identify with him. But when you do not like him, he is deprecated. You know what is déprécié, deprecated. Yes, what do we have? What feeling do we have towards him or her, the character? Rather than identification, there is mockery, sarcasm. They create in the reader a feeling of, would you like to be a subject of mockery? Yeah. Repulsion. Yeah. Yeah. It's distanciation. J'ai perdu espoir. Personne ne va la trouver. Instead of identification, we have Distance. Good. Because, as I said, the main character is mocked, satirized, ridiculed. But what happens at the end? When he is satirized, mocked, etc. At the end, it's a happy ending in the comedy. What does it... the main character, what happens to him? No, never. Never. He is actually... Okay, let me tell you a classical example that you will like. And I mean classical, not Greek, okay? I mean Egyptian. And not old Egyptian, modern Egyptian. When someone asks or proposes for a woman, and then he is not of the same rank as her, for a beautiful girl, he is mocked, and then beaten, and then sarcasm, everything as you like, okay? But at the end, he is rescued, and he is allowed to marry the beautiful girl, and what happens to him? What do we call this process? He is integrated. Go to Northrop Frye, Anatomy of Criticism, you will find these concepts. They are not mine. I would wish to have discovered them all, but these are Northrop Frye's words. At the end of after he is beaten, after he is mocked and satirized and etc., he is accepted. We call this integration. Therefore, notice please, we have two genres which are completely different. One is humor, comedy. The other is catastrophe, tragedy. But each one with an audience. The high society, it is softened by what? By catharsis, by pity and fear, which is experienced in watching a tragedy. And the ordinary man, he is beaten, chastised, deprecated, etc., and then integrated in society, rehabilitated. Why? Because now he has learned the values of those societies. This is why he is integrated. You have heard values. How do you call this now? This process of teaching to someone so that he will join the value of society. What is it? There is a word now, concept. Yeah, now we act not as he is. After he reformed himself, his character. Yeah, now we assimilate him. But assimilation, you are in the target of foreign languages. Good. But suppose we are just dealing with our own language. How do we call this process? You know it. It's a sociological concept. It is socialization. And now the individual is socialized. I give you a definition of socialization. Socializing, taken from a dictionary of sociology, not mine, okay? It says socialization, is the process whereby the young, as has just explained, the young of the society learn what? The values, ideas, practices, and rules of that society. Okay? Therefore, literature, in a way, allows us to learn about the values, ideas, practices, and rules of society. In other words, in one few sentences, literature is a good means of socializing individuals. You agree with me with this? Let's now remove comedy and tragedy, etc., because they were Greek genres. Let's return to modern literature. We do not have this distinction because we are not living in Aristotle's time, okay? We have, therefore, if we recapitulate, we synthesize, we have two forms of literature. A literature which deals with myth, like in tragedy. But people now do not believe in myth, do they? Yes, they do. Actually, now we do not speak about myth. In a modern world, we do not speak about myth. We speak about narratives. And all societies have narratives. And modern society, Enlightenment has formulated narratives. Okay, what are they? One of them is progress. Democracy is a narrative. Science is a narrative. All these are narratives. But if we go to the origin, these are grand narratives, that is myths. But we can include other narratives. We can include also development, democracy, citizenship, leadership, environment, or what they call, a word I took from Professor Amesian, the big areas of learning, big areas in which build our learning. At the same time, this is narratives. We can even include religious narratives. Why not? We can even teach our children through religious narratives. All we are Muslims, for example, or Christians teach biblical narratives, etc. And then this is to replace tragedy, which I said the word which does not concern us now because we are not living in Greek. Let's return to the second now. Comedy, what is the equivalent, let's say? It's everyday literature. It's folk tale. You know, you can socialize an individual thanks to one proverb, a novel. These are not great narratives like, as I said, progress, science, etc., democracy, but they teach us tolerance, hard work, respect for environment. This is the second type of literature which can be used in socializing individuals, in other words, in giving them civic education. Now, I conclude by saying, before I give the floor to Mr. Professor Amesian, I told you to remind me two words, which are? The title, let it to the end. Civic, yeah, the dichotomy, civic and violence. Now, in inserting in our educative system a civic program, a program or a syllabus for civic education, we feel no more the need to dichotomize, separate the grand from the grand narrative from the narrative of everyday life. This is one. And when we teach through literature civic education, we no more need violence. OK, I stop here.
Vous vous rapprochez allègrement des 30 minutes. Je vois que si je secoue pas le cocotier un tout petit peu, vous n'êtes pas prêt à céder votre micro, tellement il y a de l'enthousiasme en l'air, et vous vous êtes transformé en un certain moment. Au lieu de donner une conférence, vous êtes l'enseignant qui professe la littérature.